From the river valleys near the border to the hills of the Santa Ritas, southern Arizona is full of places where past lives are still written into the walls, trails, and old foundations. This episode brings together three of them: a mission, a mining town, and a gold camp, each telling a different part of the story. Tucked along the Santa Cruz River, just north of the U.S.-Mexico border, lies Tumacácori National Historical Park, one of the oldest surviving mission sites in the American Southwest. This place preserves more than 300 years of human history, shaped by the Alto people, Spanish Jesuits, Mexican settlers, and eventually the American frontier. The mission here began in 1691, founded by Jesuit priest Eusebio Kino. It was part of a chain of missions stretching up the Santa Cruz Valley. Designed not only for religious conversion, but also as footholds of Spanish control. When the Jesuits were expelled from New Spain in 1767, the Franciscans took over and started building the large adobe church you see today.
This is the remains of the Jesuit church that was here. My best guess is that what we're looking at in the background might be a Franciscan church, and the Jesuits were expelled at some point in Spanish history. I don't remember the exact year, but I wonder, was there a smaller church here at first? This was originally known as what was called I'm trying to remember the Spanish word for it, but a church that was visited. So there wasn't like a full-time priest here, and a priest would come occasionally, but then I believe it converted to a main center later. But
construction lasted decades and was never fully completed. What makes Tumacácori so compelling is how much of its original fabric survives. The thick adobe walls, exposed brick, and unpainted plaster tell the story of frontier craftsmanship, built by local Otham labor using river clay, stone, and traditional methods that have withstood centuries of heat, rain, and abandonment. Inside the church, you can trace the outlines of frescoes, niches, and architectural details the Franciscans intended to finish but never did.
I'm sure back in the day this was even more ornate. I think you can still see some paint on the walls, but I imagine this was all painted and there were idols and just lots of beautiful things to see here.
Mission life extended far beyond religion. The grounds supported orchards, gardens, and farming tools storage, all designed to sustain the community through the desert's long, dry seasons.
But basically, here's an example of mission life, and what I was trying to tell you is that much more than just religion. So the Spanish were basically following rivers, which they would have needed to, because they had horses and oxen and all of these kind of creatures that would need water. So following these rivers, it was a lifeline, and it helped them do things like plant these orchards.
Spanish followed rivers like the Santa Cruz to sustain crops, livestock, and the mission's daily life. Walking these grounds, you see where European culture met the masters of arid farming, the Athom, and how both adapted to survive in this challenging landscape.
It was these people minding their own business. They were masters of arid farming. And then these people show up on horseback, probably metal armor, something they'd never seen before, and then start building all this stuff and basically trying to tell these people how to survive out here when these people were already masters.
Nearby, the mission cemetery tells a quieter story. Many graves were for Otham converts, carefully documented by the friars.
As we learned in the museum, the friars or the priests were very meticulous in documenting marriages, deaths, things like that.
Sadly, over the years, some were disturbed for artifacts, but the resting place remains a powerful reminder of the people who lived and worked here centuries ago. Tumacácori stands today not as a ruin, but as a living history, a snapshot of Spanish colonial life in the Sonoran borderlands, where cultures collided, blended, and sometimes clashed. Standing here, you're walking the same grounds as missionaries, Otham families, and early settlers, witnessing a story still written in adobe, wood, and stone. It's a place to pause, reflect, and imagine a world where centuries-old Otham lifeways met new European ideas, where survival, faith, and adaptation shaped every brick and every footstep. Just a few miles north of Tumacácori, on the western slopes of the Santa Rita Mountains, lies the high ground where the mining town of Alto once thrived.
So I set a waypoint for this approximate location, and I found an old picture. I'm gonna stand here, and I think we were looking at these three little peaks or points to kind of serve as reference points for how the town was really built high up into the hill. I think this is my approximate view, but I wasn't predicting this road to be closed off. I thought we're not actually quite on public land yet, and I think it's still part of the Solero family ranch. Man, these people are hardcore about keeping people out.
The name Alto, Spanish for high, reflects its perch above the surrounding valleys, a place chosen by prospectors chasing silver in the early 1900s.
So what's interesting to me about Alto is I think the story is very similar as it is for Solero and the ghost town there, and that the Spanish were here first. They're the ones that named it Alto, and then later people came in and built on top of what the Spanish started. But yeah, they were mining things like silver out of here for use in the missions like Tumacácori, and this is where they were. Tumacácori, by the way, isn't that terribly far as the crow flies, miles away, but we're on the western slopes of the Santa Rita Mountains, and that's going to be out that way towards the interstate, kind of from the regions we came from. So the Spanish would have, after they got settled there, they would have explored and probably talked to the natives about where they get some of their stuff, their pigments, and who knows, just if we could have been here to see it all.
Today, much of the former town site is on private ranch land, leaving only fragments visible from the roadside. But even here, the contours of the hills hint at the lives once lived on these slopes. Homes, a school, a post office, and a small cemetery. The most enduring structure belongs to Josiah and Minnie Bond. This adobe home also served as Alto's post office from 1907 to 1933. Josiah Bond, a mining engineer and local justice of the peace, helped guide this small community. Minnie Bond ran the post office, connecting Alto to the wider world of southern Arizona. The adobe's thick walls have outlasted nearly a century of desert weather.
I'm surprised at how well this whole structure stands and how there are big chunks of the wall still standing. These adobe walls just melt, they fall, they crumble, because really that's what it is. You're looking at dirt bricks. Amazing how, these things deteriorate even in less than 100 years.
In these ruins, you can still trace the rhythm of daily life, where letters were sorted, meals were shared, and frontier challenges were met with skill and determination.
And now all this structure has is the wind. The human voices that once spoke inside of its walls are no more, other than the occasional freak like me.
Alto grew alongside the silver mines of the region, part of the same economic network that had long supplied resources to communities like Tumacácori. Prospectors built homes on cleared slopes, dug mines into the hillsides, and staked their claims with hope that the veins would yield fortune. But the boom was short-lived. Harsh conditions and declining silver prices meant that by the 1930s, the town had largely disappeared. Across southern Arizona, human endeavor has taken many forms. At Tumacácori, communities built for faith and survival, At Alto, settlers built for fortune and opportunity. And east of here, in the remote valleys beyond the Santa Ritas, another mining story unfolded, a tale of engineering ambition and desert determination at Kentucky Camp. Northwest of Sonoita, tucked into the eastern foothills of the Santa Rita Mountains, sits Kentucky Camp, a small remote mining headquarters built on one big idea, that with enough water, the hills around here could produce gold. Unlike Alto, where only fragments of homes remain, Kentucky Camp preserves a full set of early 1900s structures. These cabins and workrooms belong to the Santa Rita Water and Mining Company, founded in 1902 with the goal of extracting fine placer gold from nearby gulches.
Oh, cool. Here we go. This shows us our position, though. I was telling you about all the gulches where they were doing that. This area is known as the Graterville Mining District, and this whole area is known for that type of placer mining that I told you about. And it was these gulches, I believe, that they were trying to blast rocks out of. So a gulch was just like a wash or something, probably not that interesting to go look at.
The biggest challenge wasn't the gold, it was the lack of water. Hydraulic mining, the method chosen for this operation, required tremendous volumes of it. To make the venture possible, the company's superintendent, James Stetson, designed an ambitious system of reservoirs, pipelines, and storage tanks to collect and move water across the landscape.
And then the main mining engineer, Mr. Stetson, is the one that designed, I don't think the actual riveted pipes you see here, but the system originating from the water runoff of the nearby Santa Rita Mountains, a system of ditches, pipes, gravity, and high pressure lines that got narrower and narrower to build pressure up so they could basically blast these hills like a fire hose.
The center of that effort was here. Kentucky Camp served as the operations headquarters, a cluster of adobe buildings where workers lived, equipment was maintained, and the entire water system was monitored. Life was rugged and utilitarian, but this site functioned as the nerve center of a mining plan that, at the time, seemed entirely achievable.
What I'm wondering is, though, they did do one operation, and I think it was proved to be profitable. One time they ran this whole thing, did it, and it never ran again. It's just such a shame. But I guess maybe it's not, because this whole area would have been just ravaged. But anyway, very interesting.
Everything changed in 1905. James Stetson, the project's driving force and chief engineer, died after falling from a third-story window at the Santa Rita Hotel in Tucson, just one day before a scheduled board meeting for the company. Without his leadership, momentum collapsed. Within a year, the Santa Rita Water and Mining Company was effectively finished,
tearing up the ground with splendid results. So, and this is the main investor, a sketch of George McEnany, that's how I'm pronouncing it. He was the president and chief investor in this operation. And I would say, from what I read, the reason for its demise just, and his health was failing too. So I think by 1909, he passed away. But you could see there's all these old maps, and this talks about that system. I think it was quite impressive, to be honest, what the guy did from what I read.
The hydraulic system was never fully realized, and Kentucky Camp was gradually abandoned.
So basically, I imagine by the 1990s, this was more akin to like a Ruby, Arizona, or Solero.
For decades, the site saw occasional use by local ranchers, but the structures continued to deteriorate. By the late 20th century, they were close to being lost entirely. Preservation efforts by the U.S. Forest Service, with the help of volunteers, stabilized and restored several buildings, returning them to their early 1900s appearance. Today, Kentucky Camp stands as one of the few surviving hydraulic mining headquarters in Arizona. It tells the story of a frontier enterprise built on engineering ambition, a contrast to the spiritual mission life of Tumacácori and the short-lived optimism of the silver town at Alto. Across southern Arizona, these three places tell very different stories. A mission shaped by cultural crossroads, a mining town that rose and disappeared quickly, and a remote gold camp built on engineering ambition. Each left its mark on the landscape in its own way. Today what remains is quiet, thick adobe walls, stone footings, and weathered ruins scattered across the hills. But together they trace the long, complicated history of people trying to make a life in this desert. If you like this video, we have plenty more like this. Or if you want to see more about these locations, we have full-length videos on each. Links are in the description below. Thanks for watching and consider subscribing if you aren't already. Check back as new adventures are on the horizon.